Welcome to the Veteran Spouse Network podcast, brought to you in collaboration with Coming Home Well. I'm your host, Hannah O'Brien, both a veteran spouse and the program manager for the Veteran Spouse Network. On each episode of our show, I will host different guests to learn more about the stories, unmet needs, and resources available to our military and veteran families. We're the show that's making space for your stories, so that here you know you're never alone. Welcome back to the Veteran Spouse Network podcast. While you may not have actually known it if you are keeping up with the podcast, I've been out of the office for about 3 months, just returned from maternity leave after having my second child in early April. He was born on the 5th, and my daughter turned 2 days later. So now a mom of two, now a mom of two, and loving life. Since I was very young, I always knew I wanted to be a mom. I really couldn't wait for it. Like, even when I was in my 20s and I was still very single, and all of my friends were in very serious long-term relationships, when we would always kind of wonder, like, oh, who's going to be the first to have kids? Like, unanimously, my friends would be like, Hannah, obviously. And I always thought that was weird because I was like, I don't even have a person. Like, y'all have people. Like, relationships take time to build, all that sort of stuff. But they must have seen the mom in me. And I did end up being the first of my friend group I'm still very close to have children. Becoming a mom really has been the greatest and most difficult thing I've ever done. It has transformed me in ways I don't quite understand, and kind of expect that I may fully never understand. The act of really like growing, birthing, and feeding a baby is supernatural. Like, I find myself saying that word a lot when I talk about pregnancy, birth, even just being a parent, but especially being a mother. And yet, women all over the world are doing it every day, and everyone treats it as if it's so regular, mundane, boring, even. And in fact, I'm sure people out there don't spend a single ounce of time thinking about any of this. But when you experience it and reflect on it, it's hard to understand why it's not the topic of every conversation all the time. Women are literal superheroes, and you truly can't convince me otherwise. And yet, because of history, culture, politics, this aspect of our lives, and what has turned out to be the single biggest thing I've done with my life and my body to date, often lives in the shadows. There's so much pressure, control, judgment, and shame, and many women suffer in silence through the challenges of this period of their life. And I can tell you that those challenges can be crippling. They can break people, break marriages, break families apart. The experience of pregnancy, childbirth, and motherhood has unfortunately become a bit of a political pawn. And because of all of this, so much of the awe and joy of this experience is lost, or even worse, stolen. And so many women, as a result, are left or under supported when they really need that support the most. And when we set out to do this podcast, the whole intent was really to shine a light on the experiences of this community. So this was a topic I wanted to make sure we didn't overlook. And since, this is my life right now, this has been my life for the past 3 years. And as you guys have known, if you're avid listeners, I'm a pretty open book. I thought I'd take this episode, and honestly, the next episode as well, to share my journey of motherhood, focusing really kind of on the good, bad, and ugly of trying to get pregnant, the pregnancy and birth experience, and the behemoth that is postpartum life. When I was prepping for this, I realized that in order to do these all too often undiscussed topics justice and not make you all suffer through a 3-hour podcast, it really needed to be a two-parter. So for this episode, I'm going to focus on arriving at the decision to start a family, trying to get pregnant, and the joys of pregnancy. And then next episode, The episode next month, I'll talk about giving birth and, keeping your baby alive while riding the roller coaster that is postpartum recovery. And I think it's also critical here to note that trying to have and having children is not an experience unique to the military or veteran family, which is a focus of this podcast, obviously. But being a part of a military or veteran family absolutely affects this experience, that there's no way around that. And that's actually, I feel like, a good place to start for my story. I've been with my husband for 10 years, and today we really are a solid couple. Like, I'm very impressed with where we are in our relationship. We co-parent wonderfully. We're a team. And watching him become a father and the way he loves our children is really just to deepen my love for him in incredible ways. But there were times where I really didn't know if we'd get here. If you've listened to like my first episode or our first episode, that was me telling my story, or any of the episodes that I've done with my husband, you know that the first several years of our relationship were very turbulent. My husband was not getting support for his PTSD. Um, and because of that, he did not see me as the safe space that I was trying to be. He was pretty closed off emotionally, and I didn't really understand what was like happening to him, or like how to support him or how to support myself for that matter. And a lot of damage was done. We made the decision to invest in the relationship. We both worked very hard individually and as a couple to work through it. But even as our relationship began to stabilize and even, begin thriving, I still really had apprehensions about starting a family. Um, he was still easily triggered, and even though they were smaller triggers and smaller reactions, I still had very real concerns about how this would impact a child and how the stress of having a child may impact him. Stress was a trigger, and I don't think any of us can think about, even if you don't have kids, thinking about what it might mean to have kids and not understand that that absolutely is a stressor in a whole bunch of different ways. Um, and in fact, when I was pregnant with our daughter, my first pregnancy, he did actually have the worst episode I'd ever seen. He was going through a stressful time outside of the pregnancy. Um, and it was bad. Thankfully, it was the last big episode he has had, but it scared me thinking about what if our child had been there? Would he have been able to react differently? And if not, how would that have affected the child? I had tons and tons and tons of what if scenarios running through my head. And while I'd love to say that I thought about all this stuff and we had all these important conversations before we made the decision to have children, we didn't. That episode did, thankfully, what was a good thing that came of that was we did sit down and have a conversation about, how that had made me feel and some of the concerns I had, and then kind of what were we going to do individually as a couple, to address that for the future and make sure he got the support that he needed so that it, ideally wouldn't happen again. Which just, I say this a lot too, but like communication, like that is the foundation of any good relationship. It's certainly the foundation of my husband and I's relationship. And like anytime we kind of hit a difficult spot, communication, period, is what has got us out of it. And so it did lead to having that conversation, which then led to a lot of good things. Um, so kind of let's fast forward past those apprehensions and or those particular apprehensions. In the summer of 2021, we went to Michigan for our annual family vacation, and my cousin and his wife brought their baby, and we were meeting him for the first time. And he was the firstborn of like, my generation of cousins. And my husband and I just absolutely fell in love with him. I remember like us walking down the boardwalk talking about just like how amazing he was, how amazing they were as parents, and just kind of like locking eyes. and knowing it and then putting it to words like we're ready. Like we want this. We're ready. But then reality hits. Um, and the vacation bubble, the baby bubble, it was like, yes, we're ready. But the truth was we were emotionally ready. We weren't like logistically ready. Cody had just started his own business and it was still very much getting off the ground. And financially, like having a baby was just really not an option. And while I agreed with this decision, I also thought we weren't ready, logistically to have a baby. It broke my heart. And I didn't even realize until several months had passed just how like not okay I was about it. It really felt like there was like a hole inside me, like in my soul, like that was only going to be filled by having a child. Um, And so once I realized like really how sad, depressed even I was about it, I did again communication. I decided to share my feelings with my husband, and it really helped being honest about kind of like the pain I was experiencing and being able then to open the door to him talking about his own emotions related to it. And we felt our own version of that. And so then we were able to say, okay, well, we want this even more than we thought we did. Like, what can we do to like put ourselves in a better situation to pull the trigger on this life-changing decision? And I also remember around that time, one of our peer leaders actually said something that really hit home to me. She, in talking about, because we had like these types of conversations in our groups. And so we were talking about some curriculum we had about families, and I was sharing some thoughts and feelings. And she told me, there's never a right time to have a kid. There will always be a reason not to do it, or that makes it seem hard or impossible. And, I'm a major A type. So I was like feeling like boxes had to be checked before we could move forward. And I did, as a type of person I am, I did feel like I did need a certain level of stability, to feel comfortable making the decision to have a child. But her advice really helped me understand that it was never going to be perfect. If I was looking for perfect, this wasn't going to happen. And that I could and should like trust my gut on like when we're ready. We had some of the same conversations when we discussed if we were ready to have our second child. I was ready emotionally, like when my daughter was still under a year old, but we had just bought our first home together. Um, Childcare, mega expensive. We're learning that. And just, being homeowners and raising a child is expensive in this day and age. And that every time I talk about it, every time I think about it, just like breaks my heart. Like that finances are a reason like so many people can't have children or can't have a second child. Like it's just so sad. But anyway, the important thing for us with that was really that we talked about it and we both kind of knew where the other one was mentally, emotionally, scared about logistics. We were both ready emotionally, and again, we could then turn the conversation to, okay, what can we put in place logistically to get us to that place? So making the decision that you're even ready or able to have a child is a huge deal and could probably be like its whole podcast, but you know, we'll leave it there for now. Um, so now let's fast forward for on my first child, my daughter, from 2021, meeting our baby cousin and being like, we're ready, but we're not ready. Um, in 2022, we decided, okay, we're actually ready, like ready to start trying. And I had heard so much about, it can take a really long time to get pregnant. Randomly, both Cody and I were also had like weird concerns that we were infertile. His stemmed from perhaps legitimate concerns about military exposures and being shot up with things and all that sort of stuff. Mine was just anxiety. But I'd also had people who, close to me in my life who had dealt with like very real fertility issues, had to utilize IVF, etc. And all that aside, they say that even for two like healthy fertile people, it can take up to a year of trying to actually get pregnant, which I was like, what? Uh, I grew up in Texas and, in school, they sure as heck made it sound like you have unprotected sex one time. And yeah, I mean, it's possible, which I guess is why they say it. But not necessarily likely, or has a lot to do with timing. And I got to learn all about fertile windows and things I truly couldn't believe that I was learning about for the first time as a 32-year-old woman. That was just eye-opening to me, like how little I knew about fertility and my body. Yay, trying to get pregnant. But with all that in mind, all those things to consider, we really thought it was best to get started right away, assuming this could take us at least a year, possibly more, if we were having fertility issues. Well, that was not the case. We got pregnant immediately, and I truly was so overjoyed by how easy it was. So when we decided to begin trying for our second child, despite knowing how difficult it could be, I really believed that it was just going to be just as easy the second time around. And it turned out not to be. And I was really not mentally or emotionally prepared for the impact that that had on me. My reality was that until trying to get pregnant with our second kid, I had only taken one pregnancy test in my life, and it had been positive when I wanted it to be positive. And that was one of the things the second time that stuck out to me was how painful, surprisingly painful, how painful it was to see these negative pregnancy tests when I wanted them so badly to be positive. And I remember each time like trying to convince myself, it's okay, like it's only month one, it's only month two, it's only month three. Like we knew this could take some time. It's fine. I'm fine. I wasn't. And also, let's talk about the waiting. The waiting is the worst. So you have your fertile window in which you have your best chances of getting pregnant. You have sex, whatever, however many times you can in that fertile window. And then you just have to sit and wait for like 2 weeks before a test can even tell you if you're pregnant or not. And in those 2 weeks, I felt so out of control and so helpless. And it got to the point where like got in this like psychotic Googling, like Googling over and over and over, like every possible thing my body was doing. Is this an early pregnancy symptom? I would Google like how early can you really know that you're pregnant? And like every time it gave me the same answer that I already knew, I was like, let me just like change my search terms. Let me just look at a different article. Like I'm a social work researcher, and this is what this was doing to my brain. I needed to find someone to tell me I could test earlier. I could know earlier because like I needed to know. I couldn't deal emotionally with the waiting. And so, because I couldn't deal, I often tested earlier, only to then see a negative test result that I knew might even not even actually be negative because it was too early to test. I could be pregnant, but my body wasn't going to be able to tell the test yet that test wasn't going to be able to do a positive pregnancy test at the time. And I really felt insane. Like, and I was very sad. And then the next month would come, and it was another series of the psychotic Googling and the multiple negative pregnancy tests. And then your period would come just to rub it in painfully, literally. And I had this moment like a few months in, just really thinking, like, wow, this is cruel, like cruel. And I really fixated on that word, cruel. This is cruel that to notify me that I am not pregnant, my body painfully expels the egg that could have been my baby. And then I suffer with bleeding and all this pain and all this stuff for a week. So I'm already in emotional pain. Why not just add a little extra emotional pain and some physical pain to go along with it? It seemed cruel, painfully cruel. So there was that. And then the longer this went on, the more scheduled sex became, and the more stressful sex became. And my poor, poor husband was working full time as an EMT, pulling 90-hour weeks just for his normal job. He was also in paramedic school taking weekly courses, pulling hundreds of hours of like additional required clinical shifts, and then studying for the very frequent tests they had with every spare moment he had. He was like true in every sense of the word exhausted. Um, and I felt really guilty. Like I was like, I need you to do this. I need you to perform, no matter how mentally and exhausted you are. This went on for several months, but I also, sorry, I will say, then I was also like disappointed if he ever said he was tired or, anything like that, or it just became this dynamic that I needed. I needed more. And then would feel really guilty, knowing that that was asking quite a bit at this particular time in our life. And this went on for several months, and eventually I made the decision to stop taking pregnancy tests because of how they were making me feel, to see the negative ones. And that helped a little bit, but honestly, it was really still devastating every time I got my period. Um, and then every time I got my period, I would be desperately Googling, is this implantation pain and bleeding? Only to have my body like make it very clear that that was not the case. And to add to all the stress of this, we had given ourselves a deadline because I had mentioned that annual trip to the beach in Grand Haven with my family. It's my favorite place with my favorite people. Like this trip is a deal breaker. I will not miss a Michigan trip. Um, so I knew I couldn't be so pregnant that I couldn't fly, and the baby couldn't be so young that that it wasn't safe to fly or hadn't had its vaccines, etc. So what that meant for like where we were when we made the decision to have our second child, we had 7 months to try and get pregnant. And it's you got a shot, you got one shot each month, like, and then again you're waiting until the next fertile window, and then you're waiting 2 weeks, and then you're waiting for the next fertile window, and then you're waiting and waiting and waiting, and you're so, so sad and helpless. And so as that deadline got closer and closer, both my anxiety and my depression rose. And while there were times where I really felt like this is silly, this is stupid, that we would try, that if we hit that deadline and we're still not pregnant, that we'd stop for 3 months just to go on vacation. But then I'd be like, no, like this really is important to me, and that would also impact me pretty negatively to not go. In month 6 of trying, my fertile window actually happened to overlap exactly with our annual trip to Michigan. So imagine sleeping in a cozy cottage with 6 other adult family members and your daughter, walls as thin as paper, windows constantly open because there's no AC, not to mention 10 other family members constantly coming in and out of the house. And we're caring for our daughter. So, how were we supposed to find the time to do the deed? It's not exactly like we could drop our daughter at the beach with everyone on and say, hey, please just like watch our daughter and then like don't come up to the house. Like, we have to bone, but it's cool. We're trying to get pregnant. Like, I'm sure we could have said that and they would have probably been respectful about it, but we weren't going to say that. So, as hard as it was at month 6, knowing that was going to be our reality, we decided to take a break from trying. Um, and while part of me like did breathe a sigh of relief, just like knowing we didn't have to stress about it that month, it also meant it was a missed month and that we only had one more month to try before the 3-month break. And while we were on vacation, I really tried to kind of wipe that out of my mind, and it helped. It actually was okay, because we were having such a good time there, and it was so good for our mental health. Um, and then, naturally, one night came, we'd had some wine, we were feeling good. We said, you know what, like, let's just do this for fun. Like, yes, we're also gonna, make sure that it could lead to a baby, but like, let's just be a couple. Um, but unfortunately, a couple of weeks later, my cramps and bleeding arrived to inform me that I again was not pregnant. And I had really had surprisingly high hopes for that one attempt because so much of what you read is like, take the stress out of it. Just be a couple. Like, don't make it stressful. And you're like, what? That's so much easier said than done. It's so stressful. But on that vacation, we weren't stressed. So I had been hopeful. I had also found out I was pregnant with my daughter, like in that room in Michigan 2 years prior. So I thought, like, maybe there had been some Michigan magic. But anyway, month 7 came and, we gave it everything we got. Um, about a week after my fertile window, so like a week before I would have got a missed period, I started feeling really sick. I was nauseous, vomiting, I had no appetite. And the way in which all of those symptoms were presenting, there had only been one other time in my life where I had felt that way, and that's when I had been pregnant with my daughter. But I didn't understand that because it was too early. It was too early to even know I was pregnant, much less to be having these types of symptoms. I would have been 3 weeks pregnant. And so I kind of just was like, you know what? I probably have the flu, COVID, something, like something else. I'm just sick. I'm sick. But again, my gut was telling me I wasn't. I had only felt this way one other time in my life. I wanted to take a pregnancy test, but all the data was saying you can't take a pregnancy test. It's way too early. And I knew that it would make me feel sad because this was like the last time. So I didn't want to see a negative. But it was hard waiting for that like perfect little date that your date your little app or whatever tracking app tells you to wait till. Um, and so I just decided to go for it. Impulse bought a pregnancy test on the way into the office one morning. I went straight to the bathroom at work, tested, and I was pregnant. I literally burst into tears in the stall at work. I was right, like my gut, I knew, my body knew. Did it. We did it. We had met our deadline. We had met the deadline. Like, oh, the sigh of relief. Honestly, probably the first real breath I had taken in 6 months. I didn't want to tell my husband via phone or text because I had done that. I had to do that with our daughter because we weren't physically together when I found out I was pregnant, and weren't going to be for a bit. So I didn't, but I said at the same time, I was like, how can I go the whole day, the whole day without telling him? And waiting in the office was my closest teammate. We would work together for over 7 years, and she was actually pregnant with her first child at the time. And I just like knew. I was like, there's no way I can go in there and like look at Molly or have a conversation with Molly and not tell her that I'm pregnant. I'm too excited. So I walked into the office and I just word vomited. I was pregnant. All was right in the world again, finally. So yay, I was pregnant. So what happens next? Well, for this, we'll start talking about pregnancy and I'll back it up to my first pregnancy because, of course, the first time is when you have no idea what to expect. Sometimes that's a good thing, sometimes that's a terrifying thing. For me, I was worried it was going to be a terrifying thing. Um, Here I am, a perpetually recovering control freak, and now I had what you can boil down to like the most amazing and beautiful parasite that ever lived. I was no longer really in control of my body, and yet everything was very high stakes. Like I had to keep this thing alive and healthy for the next 8 months. Ooh, the pressure. So I find out I'm pregnant with my daughter. I'm in Michigan with my family, but unfortunately not with my husband. So I had to tell someone. I had to tell someone I could hug, I could touch, right? And there was no way I could wait until I got home the next day. The next day. So thankfully I had my mom. I found her in the house. I asked her to come to my room. It was like very cloak and daggery because like so many other family members were around. And therefore like she was like super weirded out about what I was doing. I brought her into my room and I showed her the test like without saying a thing. And she looked so confused and like maybe even a little upset. But here's where the fun context comes in. This was 2022. Remember COVID? Remember that thing? It was still lingering about. And so when I had gone to get my pregnancy test, I had also gotten a COVID test and taken a COVID test because I was going to get on a plane the next day. I'd been out of the state for a week with a bunch of people, and so I wanted to make sure I didn't have COVID before I went home. And so my mom legit thought I was showing her a positive COVID test and was having that moment of like, oh great, we're gonna have to go out there and tell the family that you have COVID. So good. So now you can understand the look of horror on her face. But then it clicked and we both had that big like emotional response. And so I asked her, I was like, do I wait to tell Cody? Do I call him? And she was like, you gotta call him. So I called him, I FaceTimed him rather, and I kind of like panned to the test without saying anything, saying kind of he had no idea what I was doing. It's like, are you showing me a bug? But then it clicked. It was weird having that moment of like pure emotion and joy and not being able to touch my husband. But I'm glad I didn't wait. And I brought my dad in, I told him, and now I had a decision to make. I was very newly pregnant. And you hear a lot of people say, like, oh, you shouldn't tell anyone until you're out of the first trimester, because it's more likely in your first trimester that you could miscarriage. But I was with my family, like my favorite people. And I really didn't know how I was supposed to just like hang out with them for the entire day with this news and not share it. So I asked Cody what he thought, because after all, it wasn't just my news to share. And he said, you know what, this is your decision. I went to go get ice cream with my aunt, my cousin, and his wife, and their son. And she was actually pregnant with their second child at the time. So I was like, I have to tell Brittany. So I pulled her aside. I told her she was ecstatic. And I wanted her advice. I wanted her advice on like, should I tell other people? Because like, it kind of feels like it's a rule, which let me tell you right now, nothing is a rule, but well, some stuff's a rule, health stuff, but and she was like, it's a personal decision, and she's right. A lot of people do have like big anxiety feelings or just whatever hangups, whatever they are about this, like who to tell you're pregnant, when to tell them. Again, they make it sound like it's this rule that you're breaking if you tell people too early. But for me, I felt like that cut short my joy, like that and it also cut short my sources of support. I wanted the people I love to be able to share in this journey and this joy with me and be able to provide me support. And so for me, ultimately, what it came down to was who would I be comfortable telling I'd had a miscarriage? Because that's the big scary thing. And for me, I knew if I had had a miscarriage, I was going to be heartbroken. I was going to need support and I was going to need the people in my life, people closest to me, to know that I needed that support. So that was kind of like the measuring stick for me. If they weren't someone I would be comfortable telling I had had a miscarriage, then they didn't get to know until later. But the one thing I want to say here is this is a personal decision for every woman, every couple to make. And please don't ever let anyone pressure you to telling people sooner or later than you want to. It's your joy or not. So, spoiler alert or whatever, big, you're probably not surprised. I told my whole family. But I'm so glad I did. If I had waited, this is the only time I get to see some of them, once a year. If I had waited, I wouldn't have gotten to tell them in person. I wouldn't have gotten to have the hugs and then be able to like spend the whole day with them, just like talking about it and being so excited about it together. I told my best friend as soon as I got home. I told my closest friends when I was around 6 weeks, and it filled my cup. It made me happy to do that. Um, and it gave me support, which I needed. Because when week 6 of my first pregnancy hit, everything changed. To start, I really thought that the moment I tested positive, I'd call my OB and she'd be like, "Come right in, let's confirm," and start talking about things. No, they won't even see you until you're 8 weeks pregnant, which like floored me. Okay, so this is one of the points where I'm at the highest risk of losing this pregnancy. This is my first pregnancy. I literally have no idea what it means to be pregnant. And you trust me to just keep it alive. Like, what? No way. Like, I will say they gave you like a little 15-minute phone conversation and an informational packet, but I still felt very under-equipped to be responsible for my pregnancy on my own. Like, for another, from when I knew, like another month. Kidding me? And then the other thing that was like hard was that after kind of that initial excitement of my dream of becoming pregnant, like coming to fruition and getting to tell everyone and all that fun stuff, I had expected that at the same time I was going to feel like very connected to my pregnancy. And I didn't. I actually felt very disconnected from it, and that really bothered me. Um, I expected to feel really different and feel this intense, like fiercely intense connection to the baby, and I didn't. I didn't really feel anything at all, and that actually made me sad. Like, was this a bad sign? Was I lacking like innate maternal instincts? Was something wrong with me? It also didn't help that about at that same time, 6 weeks, I got unreal amounts of morning, afternoon, and evening sickness. I pretty constantly was throwing up, and I had like very serious food and smell aversions. And I had no appetite. And this went on for about 3 months. Like it was so severe that I lost like over 15 pounds in my first trimester. This was also when I learned how closely my enjoyment of food is tied to my happiness. I was like literally depressed and physically weak. I was terrified that this was going to be my reality for the entire pregnancy. I was also a little scared that it meant my baby wasn't getting the nutrients it needed and that make them at a higher risk. Turns out the beautiful parasite that they are, if you're not eating, they just suck all the nutrients right out of your body. So they're fine. You're just really not. And let's not forget to mention the symptom no one is talking to her about, or at least I never heard anyone talk about. I was literally peeing my pants multiple times a day. I'm sorry, what? Like, you have to pee all the time. That's part of it. I knew that. But then I was also constantly throwing up. And you can imagine what the act of throwing up may do to a bladder that's full. Ding, 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 it empties it. And let me tell you, hey, if you're wondering, Hannah, did you ever try going pee first? You bet yourself I did. I certainly tried. Sometimes I made it, but then I'd end up throwing up on the floor while I was peeing. Or even if I was able to pee first, it didn't matter. Somehow I still would pee myself like mere seconds later while I was throwing up. And there were legit multiple times where my beautiful, beautiful husband was cleaning my throw up or my pee off the floors. What a saint. Thank the absolute Lord, I was working from home 90% of the time during my first pregnancy. I was literally packing multiple changes of clothes to go to work or to someone's house or, you name it, if I had to leave the house. And I was horrified when thinking about how I was going to manage an outfit change. I remember the first day I had to go into the office after I started feeling this way. My husband found me sitting in the car in the driveway crying. I like really didn't think I could do it. Oh yeah, and the hormones, those are real. So, and I didn't understand that because I thought it would just be like your how you were on your period. And I guess I was just one of those lucky girls where like I didn't get big hormonal spikes on my period. I never really felt like extra emotional or anything like that. Um, I never had brain fog or anything. So now I feel you ladies and you're all heroes. I'd cry at the drop of a hat. I'd cry uncontrollably. Immense amounts of fatigue. A tired that truly cannot be cured by sleep. I was miserable. I was really miserable. And this is not what I had hoped it would be. And that kind of made me wonder if it was a mistake or if it was ever going to feel better. So enter the second trimester, where seemingly across the board, the universe decides to cut women a break. Your appetite is back. You feel happy and hopeful. You have a sex drive, energy. Life is full of endless possibilities. For me, this was also when I found out I was having a daughter. We did the genetic testing where you're also able to find out the sex if you want to. My husband and I decided we wanted to. And I'll be straight with you guys. I wanted a boy. I'd always wanted boys. Don't know why. I wanted boys. But they called with my test results. My husband wasn't home at the time, but I was like, you gotta tell me. I gotta know. So they told me I was having a girl, and I felt no disappointment, only joy. As soon as I hung up, I opened the list of baby names that my husband and I had been working on, and I just like knew her name was Reese. Somehow, instantly, there was that connection that I had been missing. She had a name, and she was mine. Towards the end of your second trimester, some not so great things happen, and for me, some not so great things happened. All women around that time have to take a glucose test to determine if you have gestational diabetes, or what they call GD for short. So, without boring everyone to death, GD is when your placenta decides to prevent your body from using insulin effectively for no reason. Like, for real, they don't know why this happens to some women and not to others. Cool, thanks, placenta. So, for the test, you get to drink this lovely drink that, like, pretends it's Sprite or orange soda if those drinks were disgusting. And then you sit in a doctor's office for 3 hours and have your blood drawn every hour. Oh, and you're not allowed to eat before or during. It's really lovely. Well, you've probably already guessed by how much time I've spent telling you about the GD experience that I was diagnosed with GD in my first pregnancy. I thought I'd be scared. They do tell you some scary things about how your baby can be giant and not be able to be safely taken out of your body and other first scary things that I don't want to hear. But in reality, it was just really overwhelming. In addition to what were now biweekly OB appointments I was having to go to, I had to take a nutritional class and I had to meet with a GD specialist weekly. I had to start testing my blood sugar 4 times a day, and I had to make drastic changes to my diet and exercise, with the hope being that I could manage this with diet and exercise alone. And on the diet front, I had to cut out tons of carbs. And this is when I learned what carbs actually were. You think you know what carbs are, right? I learned through this experience that a lot of us don't really know. Carbs are not just grains, they're not just junk food, they're fruits, they're vegetables, they're a lot of healthy things. I had to become a research scientist, analyzing every food, thoughtfully crafting each meal. I also had to log every single meal by hand in the world's tiniest little boxes and then upload them to my doctor weekly for her analysis. I hate needles. I hate them. And now I was having to shoot a needle into my finger 4 times a day for the rest of my pregnancy. My Marine turned paramedic husband was so patient with me as I psyched myself up for like 10 whole minutes to do my very first finger prick. They also wanted me to exercise a lot for a pregnant lady and wanted me to exercise right before bed. Are you? No, no. You know how tired I was? Jeez. I had just begun enjoying food again, and now I felt so restricted. The joy was gone again. And say, like, if you wanted to have a cheat day, a cheat meal, like to go out to eat or I don't know, enjoy the cake in my own baby shower. The only way I was allowed to do that was if I would work out for a half hour within 2 hours of eating. So, the joy of eating your food is then stripped away. And it's not very realistic. It was a lot to manage. And mind you, I was working full time. And, I don't know, maybe trying to be prepared to have a child and be a mom for the first time in my life. I was no longer having any fun. My only joy was that I had begun to feel my daughter kick, which is the single most incredible feeling on the planet. So the third trimester was completely clouded with all things diabetes. I got really tired and emotional again. I remember literally falling asleep during our virtual evening birth classes. My husband took good notes, thankfully. We were also coming to the realization that our little 2 bedroom, 1 bathroom house, living with 4 dogs on the corner of a very high foot traffic street, was not a good environment into which to bring a baby home. Or at least it felt that way to us. We started to look to buy our first home, but hadn't found one. And it was beginning to really cause us both quite a bit of stress. I really didn't want to bring the baby home to that house. And I'll start this part of the story by saying I am so unbelievably blessed to be born to my parents. They are two of the most amazing and supportive human beings that have walked the earth. My husband and I talk frequently about how we would not be able to have the family we have today without them and their support. And we know there are a lot of people out there who don't have that. So we shared these concerns with our parents who were still living in my childhood home, just a few blocks away from us. Their home was much bigger, and they gave us an interesting proposition. What if we swapped houses? Now, it's worth mentioning that the house my husband and I were currently living in, or living in at the time, was my parents' house. It's the house they bought when I was born. No, I'm sorry, when they got married and they moved out when I was born. So it's a house they were comfortable in, but it hadn't been their home in over 30 years. But this was it. This was gonna be huge. We were so grateful for their generosity and took them up on the swap. I remember feeling so much more at ease knowing we would have more space and all be quieter. But then, mind you, that did, of course, then add the stress of like we had to move everything we were gonna need. So that took stress, added stress, both. And the other thing causing me stress was that I was I was really starting to understand the reality that I was going to be gone from work for 3 months. As I hope my listeners already know about me, I love this job. It's a huge part of my identity, and the thought of leaving that job and my team, my leaders, but you guys for 3 months honestly seemed impossible. Not only did I think maybe I couldn't do it, but I didn't think I wanted to do it. But I also wanted to do maternity leave and have that time with my child. We were also a very small team at the time and we had a lot going on, and it I didn't feel good about asking my team to pick up my tasks for 3 months. And my feelings aside, in addition to keeping up with my normal task, I also had to prep my team for my leave. So I was spending hours and hours creating SOPs and training videos, meeting with my team members to make sure they felt equipped to take on my role. Like, keep in mind, I've been doing this job for 6 years, and unfortunately, that meant a lot of stuff was like in my head. I try not to do that now. So it was really time consuming. It was stressful, like trying to make sure I was dotting all those T's and nope, you don't dot T's, whatever. Dotting the I's, crossing the T's before I left. Due to all those other things going on, I actually don't remember having a lot of stress about what came next, like the going into labor, giving birth, becoming a mother part. There was a lot of like researching and buying things. Oh my God, all the things you have to buy. And that was overwhelming and expensive. And it was hard to know exactly what you needed. And I do remember being nervous about what was to come, but I was also excited. So now the fun part and kind of the last piece is like, what about when you go through this a second time? How comparing my first pregnancy and my second pregnancy, some things were very similar and others were very different. I found out I was pregnant when I thought I was 3 weeks pregnant. The OB couldn't see me for another 6 weeks. I was just as if not as if whoop, I was just if not more sick. I was just if not more sick than I had been in my first pregnancy. Only this time it was even earlier. I was again throwing up, peeing myself, all the stuff we already talked about. And I had no appetite. In my first pregnancy, I didn't really speak up about my nausea or loss of appetite and how it was kind of impacting not just my health, but my mental health until like it was pretty much over. I just thought this is part of the gig, this is part of pregnancy, women do it, and so I suffered in silence, as many women do. So I knew this time I'm not doing that again. Like, I am not doing it, and there's no way I can wait, um, whatever, 6 weeks to talk to my OB about this. So I messaged her in the portal describing what was happening, told her this has happened last time. I'd already lost 5 pounds in a week. I needed meds. I needed them now. The nurse responded, and I will truly never forget her response or how it made me feel. She told me that there's no cause for concerns, completely normal, the baby's fine. And she told me just try eating anything I could keep down. I remember her being like, even if it's ice cream, it's fine. And she suggested I try taking a sleeping pill that had like some anti-nausea properties and report back in a few days. And I'm like, did I say I was concerned about the baby, lady? Is the baby your patient? Like, I'm telling you, I'm concerned about me. I told you I can't keep anything down. I can barely keep water down. I'm suffering. I need relief. And I'm sorry, you're wanting me to take a sleeping pill? I have a job and I take care of a toddler. My husband's a paramedic. He works 24-hour shifts. So there are a lot of days where it's just me and my toddler. She has insane amounts of energy, cataclysmic mood swings. I can't just be like, "Oh, sorry, mommy. Or sorry, mommy. Sorry, sweetheart. Mommy's tired because I'm on a sleeping pill." Like, give me the meds. And because my husband was a paramedic, I knew what meds they should be giving me. I was like, give me the meds. I said it. But, whatever. I was mad. I was really mad. I had felt like, and also her response just kind of made me feel like an incubator, not the patient. You're good. It's fine, mama. You're fine. The baby's fine, so you're fine. And I'm like, the baby can be fine and I cannot be fine. Those things can coexist. But I decided I'd try what she suggested, and then demand the pills I knew I needed. And they didn't work. They didn't work. So I demanded the stronger meds. I was prescribed them, thankfully. Um, and I did try and be mindful. Like I didn't take the meds all the time. So I still was having, lack of appetite, frequent vomiting, all that stuff. But I knew if like I needed to eat or if I wanted to go out or if I needed to go to the office, like if I had to not be vomiting constantly and feel horrible constantly, I knew I had something that would provide me immediate relief. And it provided relief in more than one sense of the word. And as a result, I started to feel a little bit more human, and a lot more capable. Um, and I tell this part of the story to really encourage women out there to advocate for themselves with their physicians. Well, with not just your physician, whether your physician, your boss, your coworkers, even your family or your spouse. What your body is doing is incredibly difficult physically, mentally, emotionally, spiritually. Um, and like once you're able to identify what could make it even 5% easier, ask for it, demand it. Don't take no for an answer. Like this isn't regular what you're doing, and you shouldn't suffer through it because women do it every day. Like give yourself a break and get the support that you need. And even with the relief of the meds, I was still concerned about the nausea. It had started so early this time, and I was still losing a lot of weight. I was also just really confused as to how I was even having morning sickness at 3 weeks pregnant. I was terrified that might mean I was having twins. Twins do run on my husband's side of the family, but not on mine. But I knew it would just be just our luck that after feeling like we could barely afford to have one more kid, we'd be pregnant with two. And as my first OB appointment approached at 9 weeks pregnant, I was very nervous. My husband was also working that day, so he was unable to be there. Thankfully, I was able to FaceTime him, catch him in between calls while we did the ultrasound. And as soon as the image popped up on the screen, I was met with confusion. What was I looking at? And then my OB said it out loud. Well, that's a big baby. Yes, it was a big baby. Way too big to be a 9 week old. Haha, oops. I was 13 weeks pregnant. It turned out that taking that month off of trying while we were vacationing in Michigan had been the ticket after all. We did get some of that Michigan magic. So, wow, okay, I was 13 weeks pregnant and officially out of my first trimester. Oh, huge sigh of relief. That meant I had not been sick early. I had been sick right on schedule. It also meant that there was a very good chance I was going to start feeling a lot better very soon. It also meant that my due date was now going to be 6 days after my daughter's second birthday. Throughout the rest of the appointment and even after, I was still kind of in shock. And I was also confused. I had been so sure I had gotten my period in August, which is why I didn't take a pregnancy test. I remember Googling implantation pain and bleeding, wondering, hoping if that's what it was. But no matter how many different articles I searched for, hoping to tell me what I wanted to hear, I really did feel confident I had gotten my period. It walked and talked exactly like my period, and it was actually implantation pain and bleeding after all. Like, what? And I harp on this just to convey just how difficult it is to decipher our bodies as women. And so much of what you look up about fertility, menstruation, pregnancy, birth, postpartum, etc., all beats this continuous drum that every woman is different, every pregnancy is different, blah, 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 blah. And all I hear is that they know next to nothing about our bodies and that we're on our own, ladies. It's incredibly frustrating. But with that said, it's important to remember that every woman is different, every pregnancy is different, every period is different, etc. So everything I'm sharing here, is my own experience only. Yours certainly will be different, and it's critical not to compare. In my experience, it's a surefire path to some unpleasant emotions. So while I was absolutely stoked to be out of my first trimester, sailing into the bliss that is the second trimester, and starting to get my appetite back, I was still battling a lot of fatigue. Now, the second time around, I was a mom to a rambunctious toddler, so I can't say how much that contributed to my crippling exhaustion, but I'm sure it did. Quite a bit, probably. All the apps and articles tell you to rest, kick your feet up, mama. You need it. You deserve it. Well, what happens when every time I lay down, my toddler shouts, Mama, up, go over there, and has a full-blown meltdown if I say no? Yes, there was no rest for the weary this pregnancy. It was hard, and I won't try to sugarcoat it. It was very hard. I began to have a lot of anxiety about how it would be postpartum, caring for a newborn, operating on minimal sleep, and still having to show up for your toddler. My husband had completed paramedic school and had the opportunity to move to a brand new district where he not only would be getting paid more, yay, but be in a better environment. The catch? His first day would be April 7th, which turned out to be 2 days after our son was born. He would need to go in on the 7th for orientation, and then he would only be able to be with us for 10 days after that before having to return back to his 2 to 4 24-hour shifts a week. And even knowing I was going to have immense support from my family, I was really worried that I was going to be on my own a lot, and I wasn't sure if I could do it. I kept reading that everyone agreed that having a newborn and a toddler was a lot easier than being pregnant with a toddler. And oh God, I was praying they were right. And I won't make you wait until part two to answer that one. It is so much easier. When you're pregnant, you're tired in a way that no amount of sleep cures. You're physically, mentally, emotionally, spiritually exhausted. And your toddler doesn't give a shit. When you're postpartum and working off minimal sleep with the newborn, you're sleepy, not tired. Sleep, even in small amounts, makes a world of difference. So if you're pregnant with a toddler right now and you're scared shitless, there is a light at the end of the tunnel, at least a little one. But here we go. Unfortunately, again, unfortunately, during my second trimester, I was again diagnosed with gestational diabetes. I had kind of gotten a heads up that it was likely this would happen again. My initial blood work taken at my first appointment showed that I was pre-diabetic. I had totally freaked out asking them, does this mean I was pre-diabetic this whole time, that I'm just a pre-diabetic person? Or does this mean that I am a pre-diabetic pregnant person? And, they kind of were like, well, you're pregnant, so that's all we can tell you. We can't say. Maybe you are a pre-diabetic person, but we can't know that because you're pregnant. So you're a pre-diabetic pregnant person. Um, they also had me do kind of a 1 hour glucose test earlier in my pregnancy, and I didn't feel it, but the results weren't super promising. So I'd been preparing myself for the reality of having it again. But I knew I had survived it. I had managed it with diet and exercise. I'd had a normal birth, a healthy baby. I could do that again. I didn't want to do it again, but I could. After all, my appetite had just returned and I was enjoying eating anything and everything I was craving. I really didn't want to return to this like strict diet, all the tracking, the management, a bunch more doctor's appointments, the finger pricks. But I could. I knew I could. And the fact that I had kind of mentally prepared for this to be my reality really helped my mental state once it was, in fact, my reality. I just said, okay, it is what it is. I know what I'm supposed to do. I'll do it. It's not forever. Because I failed to mention earlier that with GD, when the slacker placenta gets lost after you have the baby, most women's bodies go back to normal. And so you no longer have diabetes and you can go back to eating whatever the hell you want. Yay. But anyway, so I signed up for my mandatory nutrition class that I'd taken 2 years earlier in the first pregnancy, thinking it'd be the same people, same info. I already knew everything I needed to know. I got this. Well, this time around, it wasn't just the nutritionist. They started the session by bringing in a doctor to tell us about, well, the worst case scenarios of GD. And while I knew that somewhere in my brain I had known all these things, they had told me all these things, or I had read them on the internet the first time. The way this particular doctor talked about everything was like horrifying. Here I was sitting on a Zoom where you are literally required to show your video with 4 or 5 other women who also have GD. Unfortunately, I happened to be on this while I was sitting in my little cubicle in the office. And this male doctor is describing all the horrors I could face during and after birth. And I really found myself like fighting back tears and that my fear and anxiety levels were just like creeping up and up and up. I'd been so cool, calm, and collected about this diagnosis this time. Why was this man telling me things I already knew, scaring me so much? I will give myself a break and add that he was also saying some things I didn't remember hearing last time. And it kind of made me realize that I may not have received the postpartum care and follow up that I should have, that I deserved. He mentioned that 6 weeks after giving birth, you're supposed to have another glucose test to determine if you still have diabetes, and that every 1 to 2 years, you're supposed to get your A1C checked. No one had told me that. I wasn't given a 6 week postpartum glucose test. Had they failed me? Had I been pre-diabetic this entire time? Had I been hurting my body without knowing it? I was honestly angry and very let down, felt very let down. And the other new info I got was that this doctor was making it sound like I would a 100% develop diabetes at some point in my life, probably within the next 10 years. What? Why had no one mentioned this to me last time? It was one thing to manage this when it was known to be temporary. You can do anything for a few months, but this could be the rest of my life. I was really sad and I was really scared too. Thankfully, I had someone in my life who was nearly 20 years postpartum who had had GD in both of her pregnancies. She'd also gone on insulin for both of her pregnancies. And I was able to talk to her. She did not have diabetes 20 years later. She did tell me she had recently had a somewhat, well, an A1C test result that kind of warranted further discussion. So maybe it was true, but I didn't have to believe the 10 years within the next 10 years thing. And then this doctor's description of all the bad things that could happen to my baby and to me somehow seemed much scarier this time. And even though all those same risks existed with my daughter and I'd had a completely normal birth and healthy child, I was getting really, really scared. The next day, I had my one-on-one appointment with the GD specialist. I had already been testing and reporting my sugars for a week. And in the very first meeting, she told me she wanted me to take medication. My anxiety spiked and I completely froze. What? My numbers hadn't been that bad. I knew what a bad number was, and they weren't that bad. She explained to me that my fasting readings, the ones that you take when you first wake up, had been high. Enough of them had been high. And, I'd seen it, but I thought the other ones were great, like showing that I really could manage this with my diet and exercise like I had last time. And while she agreed that I was doing great during the day and it was clear that I was putting in the work, that unfortunately the fasting sugars indicated that the placenta wasn't was not doing what it needed to be doing. And there's nothing you can really do to impact those fasting numbers. No matter how good you are with diet or exercise, if you're struggling with your fasting numbers, it means you can't control the diabetes on your own. And while I heard and believed her when she told me I wasn't doing anything wrong, I really felt like I had failed. Like, really felt like I had failed. And I just needed to try harder, or if I had only just tried harder. A lot of feelings like that, being a mom, geez. And I'd been so confident that what I was doing was gonna work, and that if I did everything I did last time, it would work like it did last time, and everything would be the same, and everything would be okay. And so for some reason, hearing her tell me in that moment, our very first appointment, that it was already not the same as last time, I started catastrophizing. If it wasn't the same, then I could no longer believe it was going to be okay. It was already different. My body was already failing me and my baby more than it had with my daughter. Who was to say we wouldn't, who was to say I wasn't going to be the worst case scenarios this time? Who's to say my baby wasn't going to be the worst case scenario this time? Now, all those destructive thoughts are enough to send anyone into a panic attack. Adding to that was the doctor saying she would like me to get started on meds immediately and would prefer I begin taking insulin. More needles? No, thank you. I wanted to avoid insulin at all costs, even though it is a completely safe drug for me, for the baby. So we decided to try pills first. I began dreading my 4 daily readings. Please, please, please let these meds work. And yet, too often I was seeing numbers I knew she would be displeased with. Within 2 weeks, the decision was made for me by my body. I had to go on insulin. Now, when you start taking these meds, you also have to begin getting additional scans to ensure the baby is fine. The sheer volume of doctor's appointments I had was getting very difficult to manage for a toddler mom working a full-time job. I'm now very grateful for the regular checking of my baby, but at the time, it was just an inconvenience, a huge inconvenience. And again, my husband had to sit with me in the bathroom while I spent 10 minutes psyching myself up to give myself that first dose of insulin. The good news, I actually ended up finding it easier and more preferable into the finger pricks. That did help my mental state immensely. But I was still very scared of what would happen come delivery time. I played those worst case scenarios in my head where I'd be getting my 34-week scan and they'd say, oh shit, we gotta go. Or where we'd be in the delivery room, they'd say, oh no, your little boy's fat shoulders aren't coming out, and now it's time for a crash C-section. I wasn't scared about pregnancy or birth because I'd done it before, and it had really been a relatively good experience. But what happened if it wasn't the same? I spent a lot of time being very anxious and a lot of time being sad. As my induction date approached, they set you an induction date when you have GD, so your baby doesn't get too big. I also became a little sad, knowing this was very likely going to be the last time I'd be pregnant. As challenging as pregnancy is, it is also truly the most incredible thing I have ever experienced. With my first, I obviously had no idea what to expect, what was quote unquote normal, and how any of it would make me feel. Within days of giving birth to my daughter, I missed being pregnant, like deeply missed it. I missed feeling her inside me. I missed being her home, not just figuratively, but literally, being able to protect her. In the coming months, it honestly made me sad to no longer be pregnant and not know if or when I may get to be pregnant again. And yes, I said get. Because despite all the challenges, pregnancy was the most amazing gift I'd ever been given. The gift of growing a healthy, beautiful child. It's an indescribable privilege and one I am fully and painfully aware that not all people get to experience when they desperately have longed for it. It is a privilege. And of course, there are a lot of people out there who know they do not want children, and that should always be our choice to make. But it was a privilege, and when I was lucky enough to experience it a second time, I made sure to remind myself of how much I had missed it once it was over. This helped me slow down, be more present in the experience in my body. It made it easier, a little easier, to get through the challenges too. It would be over, and no matter how difficult it had gotten, I knew I was going to miss it, and I knew it may be the last time. And I do miss it. I missed it a lot in a couple months after giving birth to my son. I don't feel like it's been as painful as last time, and I hope it remains that way. But I have spent time sad that it may be over for good. They tell you this is your hormones, the reptilian part of your brain whose motivation is to procreate. They tell you that it makes you forget all the bad parts of your pregnancy so that you'll do it again. I don't feel like for me that was the case. I remember all the bad parts. I remember my mouth filling with saliva every morning, brushing my teeth, running to the bathroom to vomit. I remember feeling nauseous nearly 24 hours of every day for months. I remember nearly killing my husband every time he toasted bread because the smell was ungodly. I remember the actual depression I faced during my first trimester, feeling fatigued, sick, physically weak, and lacking immense joy in my life. I remember what amounted to something like 500 finger pricks, sticking my love handle with a needle every night and having to think and stress about every single piece of food I put in my mouth and body. I remember that my son kicked me constantly, mostly at night, preventing me from getting comfortable and falling and staying asleep. I remember the restless legs in my first pregnancy that required me to get up in the middle of the night multiple times, walk around the house for 10 to 15 minutes. I remember the peeing. Oh, the peeing all the time, peeing on myself. I remember the emotional highs and lows, including highs that turned into lows. I'd see something pure and sweet. This is a true story. Like a woman pulling over to load a homeless man and his dog into her car on a 20-degree day in January. And I had to pull over because I was so violently crying because of the kindness. I remember the immense amounts of anxiety at so many different things, big and small. I remember the fatigue, the crippling fatigue. I remember it all. I even remember being in my first trimester in both pregnancy and telling my husband I couldn't and wouldn't do this again. But I could. I would. And it would be the greatest joy of my life. Would I do it again? Yes. In a heartbeat. If it meant I got to be the home to another little person who doubles my heart in size, who brings love, wonder, and joy to my life in ways I never knew were possible, supernatural ways, I would do it again and again. And again and again and again. So that's my story, or at least the first half of it anyway. And that's all it is, my story. Everyone's is different. And what I hope this may do for people is encourage them to share theirs. Not enough of us are talking about this part of life. Not enough of us are listening to women share this huge, amazing, challenging part of their life. And that only hurts us all. What our bodies and minds go through during this time is literally something no one can comprehend that hasn't been through it. It's super human. And even in the best case scenarios, which don't exist, it's hard. It's painful. Let's take women's health, reproductive health, all that. Let's take it off the political soapbox and treat it for what it is, a human experience. These women, while completing a superhuman act, are just humans and they need our support. We need your support. So my advice, as I always like to end my podcasts with, talk about it. Talk to the women in your life about deciding to have or not have children, about fertility, pregnancy, birth, what they experience postpartum. Learn about what they're going through and normalize talking about the hard parts and celebrating the good parts. Talk about it. Talk about it. Learn about it. I know this was a long one, and if you're still here with me, thank you. That means a lot. It was an amazing experience for me to write some of these thoughts down, speak them into the world, and get to share my story. And tune in, next month to hear the rest of my story. That's where I'll focus on what happens next. What happened with the birth of my two children and postpartum, which that's where I live right now, 3.5 months postpartum. So I hope that this resonated. I hope if you're still listening, that meant something resonated with you. I hope it encourages you to talk to the women in your lives who are at any stage of this journey. And I hope you tune in next month to learn some more and hear about my experience on the back side of this. And so on that, I hope to see you next time. Thanks again for joining us on the Veteran Spouse Network podcast, brought to you in collaboration with Coming Home Well. We thank you for listening today and hope today's session left you feeling a little more connected or gave you some insight into the experiences of our military and veteran families. Don't forget to check us out at veteranspousenetwork.org to learn more about how our military and veteran families can receive the support they deserve.